them. Welcome back Tessa Dooms, political analyst, and Lebohang Pheko, who's the Senior Research Fellow at Trade Collective. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Ms. Pheko, if I can maybe start with you. We normally talk about the January 8th statement as probably setting the tone for the State of the Nation address as well as the budget. It outlines the ANC's plans for the year, but the usefulness of the statement during this time, what is it?
So the one thing is that we've conflated over the years the January 8th statement with the State of the Nation address, and these are two entirely different, they serve two entirely different purposes and should have entirely different audiences. Essentially, we are eavesdropping on ANC housekeeping every January 8th. We're essentially hearing how the party is progressing, whether or not there's been growth, the most important growth nodes, the way that the branches and different regions have been performing, and whether there's a mobilization drive. And remember that the history of the January 8th statement was actually quite revolutionary, right? So I mean, from the time that O.R. Tambo delivered the first one in 1972, there was a time, in fact, when it was really more about internationalizing the ANC strategy across the world and across the liberation movements, and really trying to position the ANC's particular contribution to the liberation struggle among many other movements in a particular way. So now it's actually become a very dumbed down, diluted occasion where, rather than being a stock taking of the ANC with us as mere eavesdroppers, it has really become something that is a looking forward to the State of the Nation. And this is not the State of the Nation. This is the State of the Party.
Tessa Dooms, with regards to the signals that the ANC president has sent, not only to the party members, but the public at large, what were they?
So I think the ANC would probably rebut that by saying, we're a party that's a leader of society and all of those kinds of things. But I think what we heard was almost a reorganizing of the last SONA address, which I don't think is very forward-looking in the sense that it doesn't give us much more clarity on what some of the pressing issues are that the ANC intends to address and how the ANC as a party will do that. And so I think it's important, I think towards the end of the statement, he actually said, well, these are the priorities of government, which essentially is what he outlined last year. And then he went through kind of a blitz of this is what the ANC is going to do. We're going to work with partners to transform society. We're going to have an effective force on the ground. Those are the things we really needed to hear more about. The way the nuts and the bolts of this party is going to work to mobilize society, to mobilize resources, to use its political power to get the work done of the state. And I think we didn't hear any connections between the party and the state in a real sense that gave us a sense that it's the ANC party that's governing this country, and it's going to provide something new and interesting.
Look, we can talk about the high unemployment rate in South Africa. We can talk about inequality, poverty, the triple threat, as they call it. But South Africans at this very stage, we want to know whether the lights will stay on at this stage. Do you think the president went far enough in order to tackle that issue? You mentioned, I didn't hear it, about him being misled, with regards to Eskom. Did he go far enough to, I guess, take the nation into the confidence and say, okay, this is the plan we have going forward?
There was nothing fresh. I mean, I think it's a bit difficult for the president to tell us that he was misled, because remember that under President Zuma, he was the lead of the task team that led Operation Lights On, basically. And I think so. Whatever, it's a bit difficult to listen to him dehistoricizing the Eskom issue. It didn't start in January. It didn't start a few months ago. It's been an issue for the last at least 8 to 10 years, of which he's been well aware, even when he was the deputy president of the country. And I think, secondly, again, I'm not sure whether that is the place for this kind of pronouncements. I just don't think that it's an ANC issue. That's a national issue. But nonetheless, it would have been effective then to talk about what the ANC's posture and positioning is on alternative energies, for example, on fossil fuels, etc., etc. And for them to tell us what kind of, to tell us stuff about carbon footprints, and to talk about what's their ecological plan, how are they planning to then think about, and link that in fact with land as well. How then are they going to think about ways in which their own policy internally, their own practice internally, links to trying to bring about more longevity and different diversification of fuel sources. But I don't think that the ESCOM issue per se belongs in the January 8th statement.
Yeah. One of the things that the president actually mentioned was this new source of energy, such as gas and intermediate energy, which can be brought by ship. We were talking to Ted Bloom with regards to that. So we'll explore that, I guess, in later programs. But one of the other issues, Tessa, was unity. That's an internal issue. Did he spend enough time on unity within the party?
I don't think he spent any time on unity in the party and discussing and describing what some of those fissures are in the party that need to be mended and the ways in which the party is going about doing this work of reflecting on itself, on transforming itself. And one of the phrases that's come up constantly is, we're going to transform the ANC, we're going to renew the ANC. Yeah. And I think we do need an ANC that is practical about that. You know, we often speak about the disarray of Luthuli House itself and kind of, you know, its workers, who's there, who's not, can it even pay its salaries is something that's come up recently. I think as the ANC president, that's something that should have been addressed in all of this. But definitely what it means about the unity of the party, what it means about leadership and succession. There are so many issues that could be addressed to tackle unity. Questions about generational leadership, questions about women in leadership. I think there were so many things that could have been said more emphatically about the party and its unity to give us the assurance that we have a governing party where we're not going to see changes in cabinet based on factions, where we're not going to see people being deployed based on factions. One of the things he spoke about was the Integrity Committee, very much in passing as well. And we wanted to hear more about the Integrity Committee and the ways in which it's going to foster unity by bringing together, you know, the old guard of the party to help them with the integrity issues and consolidating. So I think, again, there were some gaps there that could have been filled up with much more clear statements about what's the way forward.
Let's look at the optics. It's always interesting around the January 8th statement. We know the ANC is very good in putting bottoms on seats in terms of the rallies. I heard a number mentioned there, 25,000 people in that stadium. What did you see?
I saw a party. I mean, I think it was really it's difficult. The optics are interesting because it also illustrates the dissonance between party membership and really what's happening around us and what's happening around, you know, the ANC itself. The kind of the sound bites that we were getting at the end illustrated that there's a huge distance, even in interest and in engagement, the level of engagement, and that's a crisis of cardership. And that's been I think there was the decade of cardership. I think that if that's kind of the sum total of it, it's probably a good moment to go back and reflect on it. And exactly that, though, the ANC would have had the opportunity to again reflect on what has happened to the decade of cardership. And I think, you're a young person, Tess, still. And I think that the whole notion of what's happened to the ANC Youth League, for example, and how the machinations and sort of what has happened with that, because one of the huge bolstrums and the huge forces of the ANC historically has been young people, has been the component structures. If those aren't as effective as they used to be, the Women's League being another example, then I think that there needs to be a very honest conversation about that, which would have been good to hone in on during this particular statement.
We are joined now by Xolani Dube from our Durban studios. Xolani, always a pleasure having you, political analyst. What's your biggest takeaways?
You know, what is very interesting is the fact that the ANC has been a political organization thriving on gimmicks, spectacle, as well on deception. But that currency is starting to evaporate. People now are starting to see through that. They can't keep following an organization that really do not mean what it says. And so that's what one can really highlight today. The fact that the atmosphere, there was no euphoria, everything was subdued. And so is the reflection that the ANC is an organization currently that is in a serious turmoil. And moreover, when you look at its document, keep on repeating the manifesto, because this is another manifesto of the ANC, of which we had it last year, and they would give us another one next year. It has not moved from the kind of a base document that the ANC embraced, or that where the so-called the apartheid government or the apartheid diplomats, as well as the so-called mineral energy complex, imposed to the ANC. And ANC keeps on repeating this document. And when you look at this document, especially its economic policy, is still rooted in the neoliberal economic policies. And so all these social ills and everything that the ANC is trying to lure us with is not going to happen unless the ANC really starts to rethink its economic policy and also rethink its membership. Because another crisis that we have are the people who are there in the ANC, who are not there for on behalf of the people, but who are there for themselves. And so I think those are the things that one can say has really observed today. And also, another thing that was very surprising, our president or our country is going to be the chair of the AU. Yep. But when you look at Benny in DRC, there is such a very horrendous things that are happening there. But no one is saying anything. We are more concerned about the war of Iran and the USA. And so it begs a lot of question about our orientation around the issues of Africa well-being. And so I think there were lots of issues that one can perforate if we got time.
Ms. Pheko, as Xolani was saying, the president did touch on the issues with regards to Iran and the United States. He described as deeply concerning the proactive military action of the United States. What do you make with regards to his stance in this issue? Yeah,
I mean, this is typical of South Africa over the last few years, which has been very skittish in its international relations posture. And I think even in relation to, the way that we relate to Africa, the rest of the continent, there's, despite our posture as being a leading nation, we're incredibly reticent in the times and the areas that are important. And this reticence, I think, comes from a couple of things. One is this reluctance to be seen as being overbearing, and yet understanding that we do have a lot more wherewithal and a lot more capacity to respond and to influence proactively a lot of international relations influences. And I think the other thing is that our footprint has shrunk quite considerably. And I think under previous administrations and dispensations, I think notably under the Mbeki administration, we had a much more proactive sense of our position in the continent and in the globe. So in Sudan, in Zimbabwe, DRC, for example, that was much stronger. And then I think that there are a couple of key cutting points or tipping points. The one would probably be the yellow fever debacle a few years ago with the Nigerian government, which soured, I think, almost not quite irreparably, but has certainly soured relations ever since. And the second would probably be, of course, the extrajudicial killing or assassination of Colonel Gaddafi as well. So I think that our skittishness in the midst of all of that has become much more apparent. And again, what is the ANC's position on this? And I think the difficulty and the dilemma is that President Ramaphosa had to remember that he was speaking not as the state president, but as the party president. So party to party, what kind of solidarity is the ANC offering in this kind of situation, as opposed to a state-led, a state response? And it's very slippery because, of course, there's been always such a conflation between the ANC in government and the ANC as a party, which they themselves have not been able to disentangle from themselves. So, which is why in moments like this, it's very difficult to have a very clear picture of where they're standing.
And the significance, Tessa, of having Abiy Ahmed here, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, present at the January 8th statement. What's your reading into that?
Yeah, so that is a very interesting one because he couldn't have possibly been here as the head of the Ethiopian government because he's coming to a party event. So he was here presumably as a party man. So does this talk about the relationship between the two parties? Is it a conflation of state and party to have him here and representing the Ethiopian government? And I think we were discussing it earlier. Does this mean that kind of the Ethiopian government is saying we sanction an ANC government, and then what happens to the rest? What happens to, if things change in this country? And I think it's diplomatically, it really blurs the lines when you're not clear about what basis on which you've brought somebody in. There were other parties that were present there. He named a litany of parties that were present there, but they didn't get an audience to speak. So I do think there's something that's significant about the fact that they had him speak, and if it's signaling something about the ANC's relationship to Ethiopia, or the ANC's taking from his party and from his government ways of doing things, I think that could have been made clearer. Just saying for the president to only signal, that we congratulate him for his Nobel Peace Prize did not clarify why he was there. He said a little bit about being there as part of the party, but I think more clarity on that might have been really useful. If in the coming days there are state visits and all of that, that will make a lot more sense. But in the context of this being a party event, and I think that needs to be, can't be understated, what the purpose was unclear.
Abiy Ahmed talking about the bonds that Ethiopia as well as South Africa share, but he also mentioned something very interesting, and I guess maybe signaling to the other African leaders. He says Madiba can be held as held up as for his moral leadership, and other African leaders can use this as an example. Important?
As a litmus test. Yeah, quite possibly. But I mean, I think to pick up on what Tess is saying as well, the whole notion of signaling. So I mean, the Prime Minister being here, South Africa about to take over the chairpersonship or the chairmanship of the African Union, headquartered in Addis. It could mean something. It could mean everything, and it could mean actually nothing as well. And I think also to link back to what you're saying, or to loop back to what you're saying around holding up a particular person as a symbol, a mascot of virtue, also becomes incredibly problematic as a state, as a head of state, because again, he's here in what capacity? As a state leader or as a party representative? And exactly as we were discussing earlier, it becomes incredibly confusing, and we're hoping that in time to come, we'll be able to understand what this means. But it was odd.
Xolani, you were talking about the atmosphere during this January 8th statement, and we know that the ANC can pull a crowd, but that doesn't necessarily translate in votes, doesn't it?
That's why I'm saying, when you look at the statistics for the past election, ANC is not making any inroads, but it has been decreasing. And so possibly this January 8, it might be an omen of what might happen in future to the ANC if it's not changing its ways.
Look, let's talk about what the ANC puts forward and this emotional connection that many people in South Africa have towards the ANC. But that can go both ways, because you can have somebody that says, okay, I love the ANC, but I'm very angry with the ANC, so I'm not going to vote for any other party, and I'm just going to stay at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the ANC's ability to pull crowds and get people is, I think if you've ever been to an ANC rally, there is a big emotional pull around it. It's not just about the history, it's also about a sense of community, belonging to something that's bigger than yourself. And that's a big marker of South African political life. And people's connection to parties is a lot about symbolism and identity. But I think what the ANC needs to do much more of, and what its history actually compels it to do, is go to ground. For ANC leaders to be speaking about the dusty streets of the Northern Cape as if they only saw them this week for the first time is not a very good thing. It's not a good thing for themselves as leaders to be disconnected from what's happening in communities. I think the president, in his speech a few times today, spoke a little bit and just intermittently about the idea of the ANC being this organization that's going to, through its branches, connect back. But I don't think it's only its branches that need to connect back. I think this entire organization needs to go back to ground. It needs to understand what community means, what communities look like and feel like, and the leadership should be able to reflect that. And unfortunately, fun times and champagne and cakes are not going to make people feel connected to the ANC.
Right.
It's causes, and knowing that the ANC understands the plight of people and more importantly is responsive to that plight.
I guess the ANC has trumpeted its resilience, and I guess it earned the right to do that over 108 years. I guess you earn the right to say you're resilient, but can you rely on that resilience? Because you border on being arrogant, some would say.
I think the border has been crossed quite a while ago, and I think that's typical of many post-liberation movements, and have been fallen straight into that trap. I think it's also worth mentioning that, when you say the ANC has been resilient for 108 years, but which ANC? It's taken on so many permutations ever since then, from being quite a radical force to being quite a genteel middle-class force to being one that was incredibly disconnected from rural organizing, and then to being one that then forged these alliances in the 1930s and 40s with workers' movements, and then later on with the Communist Party. And then, of course, again, there was a whole new characteristic of that, which then was brought about through the ANC Youth League and the breakaway Africanist faction then under Mlembede, Sobukwe, Mda and others. So there have been so many iterations of what we now call the ANC that it's quite difficult. I don't think that level of chest beating is really necessarily is necessarily always appropriate. I think that the power of reinvention, the power of survival is perhaps more accurate in that regard.
Do you agree, Tessa? Yeah.
Absolutely. Reinvention is the name of the game, and the ANC has to strike a balance between being able to harness and hold on to a very strong and glorious history that it does have, but it also needs to move forward. And I think the kind of party that it wants to be is what it needs to decide now. Is it going to be a party that's going to be just about governance and big structures, or is it going to be a party that's about particular issues that it's going to champion, or is it going to be a party that's going to mobilize in communities and take on an activist point of view? I think we've heard from the other political parties. You heard the DA talk about trying to be a group of activists.
Yeah.
You heard the EFF championing particular issues and trying to appeal to people on the basis of those issues. But what is the character of the ANC going to be going forward? How is it going to reinvent itself so that it doesn't just appeal to people's sensibilities because it's the government, but it appeals to people because it offers something that people are interested in responding to?
Xolani, 108 years, off that 108 years, 25 years spent in power. How would you describe that record?
The reality that we have to ask ourselves, who has been protecting the ANC and for what purpose? And so all those answers can be, those questions can be answered about the realities that we are facing today that say possible the ANC was protected by the South African ruling class for the mere purpose to serve in its interest at a particular time and space. And so currently the ANC is executing what they were supposed to execute, or is executing what the ruling class was aiming for ANC to execute when it was protecting it from exile until now. Yeah. And so I don't think really that one can really say there is so much progress. As I've said, ideologically, the ANC is supposed to come out clear to say this is the ideology that we aspire, and these are the economic reforms that are dictated by the South Africans, rather than the economic policies that really they simply come from nowhere and get imposed to the ANC. And so I think if the South Africans really see the ANC as an honorable vehicle to change the South African lives, the South Africans now need to start and have a robust and open engagement with the ANC. And the ANC claims to be the people's organization. And so this fact that ANC is got what we call it bona fide members and so forth, it needs to go beyond that. It needs to have a broader consultation, because people who are there are the people, some who still believe that the ANC is the vehicle. And so for its survival, it needs also to connect with the people beyond its membership.
Tessa, come in here.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things for me about the content of Cyril Ramaphosa's statement was two things. One was this privatization of Eskom being addressed. And so the ANC in its Congress said that SOEs were not going to be privatized, that they were going to be rebuilt. And so we hadn't actually heard a clear kind of saying from the president saying this is what it is. And I think the public has been calling for that. And I think in line with what Xolani is saying is that you need to respond to what the public need to hear. The public needed to hear something reassuring about Eskom and privatization. The second thing that he addressed in a similar way was the land issue.
Yeah.
And if you look at the 7 priorities that he set out in SONA, what was clearly different this time is one of the priorities standing on its own was land reform. And so he was making a very clear statement again, also connecting it back to that 54th conference saying land reform is going to happen, expropriation without compensation is going to happen, and for this president to say that is also a responsive move. So I do think that there were ways in which this was a responding to society, saying, okay, we're going to talk about the things that we think are most pressing to you, but I think that the question about whether these are ANC policies that this president really believes in, we're going to see the test of that in SONA.
Let's talk about Cyril Ramaphosa. I mean, when he accepted this job, one would say he accepted with alacrity. 2 to 3 years later down, do you see that same zest?
Yeah, I mean, I think Tumamina was probably the last time that I felt, or many people felt, enthusiastic and a bit optimistic. I mean, that State of the Nation address was on a Friday, and then I think on the weekend, the South Africans here and beyond had a respite, a brief honeymoon period, and then the Monday, it was just back to the grind of what happens now and what happens next.
Yeah.
And I think after we were sent, we've been a bit adrift, and we have not really been able to get a grip on what President Ramaphosa is about. And I struggle with that because, I mean, even though he has said that this statement talks about land restitution, land reform without expropriation, with expropriation, and all of the confusion that comes with that. I mean, a few weeks ago, he was heard telling a group of industrialists that there wasn't going to be expropriation, land expropriation in this country. So I think that this sort of ambiguity that he constantly seems to sidle on is very problematic. It's a bit worrying. He seemed to be the man in waiting, the prince in waiting. I mean, literally, he was groomed from the time of President Mandela. It was really a close call between him and former President Mbeki as the favorite sons, basically. And one would have imagined that he would have had a good 20 years, actually, to have a manifesto in waiting, to have a plan in waiting, something that's been incubating. And what it appears is that he's actually walked into, he received a bit of a poison chalice, but I think he's poisoned it further with his lack of decisiveness and really having to deal with these fires of factions and so on. And one wishes that he would just come down very firmly and very clearly. So it's hard to get a sense of who Cyril Ramaphosa is as the state president. We knew him as a business person, we knew him in Noom, but we haven't gotten a real sense of him right now. And I don't think he's occupied incumbency in the way that we would have expected.
Well, what's your sense of the man at this stage?
No, you know, the people, they always say the man is very indecisive, the man is not coming out. The man is very decisive. Look at the look at the energy sector, the IPPs, look at the Southern Sudan, the issue of oil, look at the issue of Kolobeni, look what those exploration rights that he gave to companies around the KwaZulu-Natal. He's a man who is on mission and he's clear what he wants. He is there to serve the interest of the minerals energy complex, and the rest is secondary. And so we need not to really lose the reality that Cyril, he is at work, and those who propelled him into power, they are pushing him and is executing what he's supposed to do diligently. And so when it comes to the issues of our country and comes to the issues of the ANC well-being, I think those things are of no concern to him, because if really he's a concerned ANC president, we know that he's the one who paid for the staff members. But look how bankrupt is that organization, and look how the outcry to the South African. And so he is the president who's there to execute a particular project, and that project is for those who propelled him into power, and we need not to fool ourselves.
Look, Tessa, this is no doubt an extremely testing time for South Africans. South Africans are extremely frustrated on one hand with regards to the electricity issues, load shedding. For the ANC, if you look at the Zondo Commission as well, there's been a number of allegations leveled against ANC members. Obviously, these allegations need to be tested. The ANC always maintains that the ANC itself is not on trial or, at the Zondo Commission. But let's talk about politics and perception. What does this do to the party at this stage?
Yeah, I think corruption has become one of those things that's following the ANC like a ghost, and you can't quite see the ANC without seeing some level of corruption there. And that's something it's going to have to work not just in remote ways. I'm going to let somebody else deal. Zondo will deal with corruption, and we'll just kind of, clean up afterwards. They really do need a much more decisive plan of action when it comes to corruption, as something that's a function of their party, because we can talk about the DA or the EFF or anybody else as long as we want to, but really corruption in this country can only be stopped by the ANC because it's got such a wide footprint of employees. And so without action from the ANC, I don't think you see anything. And I think in terms of Cyril Ramaphosa's presidency, the question about corruption is central to his presidency. And I don't think we've seen him be decisive about something like that. And that's where it matters.
Talk to us, Ms. Pheko, with regard to this decisive action. I mean, we see that the president is talking about strengthening the NPA. He wants, prosecutions to come fast, apace. What more can he do?
I think heads can roll much more quickly. I mean, it's as simple as firing a few people. It's as simple as ensuring that the few deployees are removed. It's as simple as really ensuring that some of the deadweights and some of the dreadwoods who have been in the system for a really long time, including at cabinet level, are removed in a way that sends a message that mediocrity and the sort of excesses that we have been subjected to for the past at least 10 years are no longer acceptable. I think it's one thing to talk about regalvanizing the Integrity Commission. Why has it been so moribund all along? And I think that it's, as well, the whole notion of we will, without explaining why things haven't been taking root for such a long time, what has been the inhibitors of progress in the past, and why it has come to this point for there to be this realization that we need to do things, something must change. It just isn't convincing at all. And my other thing is also this notion of, I think it's tested, outsourcing the decisiveness, outsourcing the things that need to be done. And how long is a piece of string? In relation to these corruption allegations, they go back about 25 years. So how long and how deep are we willing to undig and to unseat and to uproot this rot? And I think that would really, short of going back to basics, closing down the house, and starting all over again, which is what it may essentially take. What then is the president going to be able to do? There are so many compromised individuals within the party, so many strong men and strong women who have been deployed across, so that in many respects it goes beyond individuals. It is now a systemic issue, and whether there's the willingness to then clean up the house and what the consequences of that are.
Someone that touched on this very issue was the SACP's Blade Nzimande, and he was saying that the crippling of public entities must not go unpunished. Now, we've got a clip with regards to Dr. Nzimande talking about economic emancipation for all. And, this needs to be a united alliance with a strong fight against corruption. And he was speaking there in Kimberley. Let's listen to this clip and we'll talk about it afterwards.
The SACP takes this opportunity to congratulate the ANC on the milestone of its 108th anniversary. The ANC played a leading role in our liberation struggle, as well as in the struggle for a better life for all, in the reconstruction and development of our country. As the SACP, we are an ally to the ANC, and we shall continue to be an ally for as long as the ANC's primary objective is that of transforming and improving the socio-economic conditions of the working class and the poor of our country. The SACP reaffirms its commitment to our strategic alliance. We pledge to continue working together in pursuit of our shared strategic objective of the struggle, the national democratic revolution, and it is our view that to pursue the struggle, we need maximum unity of our alliance. We must defend and deepen the gains we have made since 1994. Led by the ANC, we have expanded access to housing, electrification, clean drinking water, education at all levels, as well as confronting the scourge against the HIV, the scourge of HIV. However, we still face a number of challenges, comrades. Key amongst these is the malady of factionalism, gatekeeping, corporate capture, and other forms of corruption, mismanagement, and bad governance. Today, as the SACP, we are saying, let all ANC branches be open to all who want to join, as the ANC is a people's movement.
The SACP's Dr. Blade Nzimande, they're speaking about this, reaffirming its commitment to the strategic alliance. He also spoke about certain challenges, factionalism, gatekeeping, and corporate capture. Tessa, was enough said in the statement about the alliance?
I mean, who knows who's in the alliance, who's out the alliance, what's the state of the alliance, what does any of it mean? I mean, today from COSATU we heard congratulations, and then from Blade Nzimande we heard, we need to get this right, if people are doing things wrong, they need to be reprimanded. Blade Nzimande has in that cabinet over the last few years and currently people who are SACP members who are deployed in that cabinet. Pravin Gordhan is actually one of them. Tulas Ngesi has been one of them. I've never heard the SACP call to order its deployees in cabinet, its deployees as MPs. And so it rings very hollow to me when a Blade Nzimande and a SACP is trying to wrap the ANC over the knuckles for its own deployees. And then he speaks about corporate capture. I mean, if we think about DTI over the years, it's been run by Rob Davies, somebody from the SACP. So if we're going to talk about the way the economy is structured and the kinds of policies that have been put in place, if they are private sector friendly, it happened under the watch of the SACP under Rob Davies. So I think Blade Nzimande has to really take a step back and ask himself if he's just pandering and posturing, or if the SACP really has the muscle to do anything within this alliance anymore.
And I think just to add to that as well, that it was surprising that very little was said in this speech around the relationships, the broader relationships of the alliance partnership, the tripartite alliance, and that's exactly where the housekeeping belongs, and that's exactly where we need to situate what is happening with COSATU, what is happening with the unions, what is happening with the SACP. That very brief soundbite from Blade Nzimande illustrates how adrift I think even the alliance parties are from the ANC itself in their ability to, I think, hold real power, to be substantive in their in influencing policy. The SACP, I think, have historically benefited greatly from this alliance. They've never had to contest an election, and yet they wield a huge amount of power and voice, commensurate to their membership, commensurate to their members, and commensurate actually to their contribution to actually building the ANC as a movement. So it is very strange when you have they also have this strange binary, this very contradictory relationship within the ANC. Well, they'll say things like, we condemn neoliberal policies, and then you'll have COSATU marching against, or COSATU of a few years ago, marching against neoliberal policies of the ANC. Oddly enough, and yet they are in alliance with them. And I think that sort of schizophrenia, the public, I think, have grown a bit weary of that. Right. And I think the broad membership have become quite confused and fatigued by that. I mean, I think that posturing and the double standards and the double talk and the forked tongues that come with that. But I was very surprised that we didn't hear a lot more about what the alliance relationships are, how to rebuild them. There have been threats of divorce and which haven't come through. Yeah. What is actually happening?
Xolani, do you think what was said about the alliance, or the lack of what was said about the alliance in the January 8th statement, was deliberate?
Look, I think this is the masterstroke of the so-called the South African ruling class, where they constructed ANC to become this omnibus, so that each and everyone can voice through this bus, and no one can deviate and be standalone. And so I think that's how they've managed to regulate the voices of those who want really to advance a contrary ideology from the ANC. And at the same time, you know, the issue of dangling the carrot of the aristocratic life is another impediment that is out there, of which it also creates a false class consciousness to the so-called the ANC, to the SACP and COSATU. And so that's why you could see COSATU and SACP in a particular promoting or defending a fiefdom lord against a progressive capitalist, of which is totally contradictory to the stages of Marx when he talks about advancing socialism. And lately, it was the SACP that protected and as in defense of a comprador bourgeoisie by name of Cyril Ramaphosa. And so I think SACP is not there for ideological advancement, but is there for their own parasitic issues and so forth. And so I don't think that really we needed to take seriously the politics of deception from the SACP and COSATU, because today COSATU is saying they don't want Godan, and is COSATU are saying they don't want Jabu Mabuza. But if you look back to the archives, it was the COSATU and the SACP that was defending the two. And so it means that COSATU and SACP, they look at the opportunistic, at the opportunities that are available and time. And then at a particular time, they are able to sacrifice someone for their own political preservation. And so it is an organization really that is mastered the politics of deception.
Ms. Pheko, I know I asked Tessa this earlier on, but speaking about Pravin Gordhan, as the political head of this SOE, should he follow suit with regards to Jabu Mabuza?
I'm not sure. I think that where is collective responsibility in all of this? And my assumption is that he is not conducting, Minister Gordhan is not conducting his own personal policy. This is ANC state policy. This is the ANC's policy. There's collective decision making. They have particular priorities that they've put in place, and that he's merely carrying out some sort of a mandate. If in fact he is acting unilaterally, then there's a problem in fact with the nature of the NEC, the nature of collectivity. It means that he's some kind of a rogue who does things under the radar, which I think would be remarkably difficult to do given the systems and the level of interface and interchange within the ANC and state-owned operations. And I think that it begs the question of why he's being left adrift. And I think this is not to have any particular brief for Minister Gordhan as an individual, but I do think that systemically there's something very bizarre about the way in which he's almost being left hung and dry, and then this suggestion that the Deputy President then makes that he has the minister has deceived the President, which is incredibly divisive and I think very problematic.
Ladies and gentlemen, stick around. I want to pick your brain for just a little bit longer. I want to take a quick break. I'll get you more analysis next.
Travel and tourism has been given a whole new meaning on Trends Travel. We uncover Africa's hidden treasures the wonders of the world. We have our pulse on Africa's diverse heritage. A combination of entertainment and lifestyle news.
This is beautiful.
Every time you look at this,
This is beautiful.
You're inspired to explore the language and the culture.
Oh wow. This is
You want to give it a try? Like you want to wear it? So we can see what you look like. Exactly like that. Hala, la Mosotho wetu.
From your organization's perspective, a good move?
Of course, yes. We as an organization wholeheartedly welcome these special remission.
What does radical restructuring even mean?
Well, it means cutting deep. It looks like
Yeah.
they need to remove about 2,000 staff, so that's radical stuff.
He's talking once again of a restructuring that we've done plenty of times. So to scapegoat Saka Numsa is highly irresponsible instead of dealing with the corruption and rot at this entity.
I could not accept the level of unconstitutionality that Minister Twele was now going through. I said to him that he doesn't have this authority to appoint people as ambassadors.
Welcome back. Well, we're continuing our discussion with regards to the ANC's January 8th statement. As you can see, we've got a team of experts here to break it all down, and we need all the help we can get. We have Tessa Dooms, political analyst, Lebohang Pheko, senior research fellow at Trade Collective, as well as in our Durban studios, Xolani Dube. He's a political analyst. Now, SABC News reporter Aldrin Sampier earlier on spoke to the ANC Women's League president, Blade Nzimande, at the celebrations. And when he asked for the comment on the resignation of Eskom board chairperson Jabu Mabuza, this is what she had to say. Watch.
Both the president and the deputy president have acknowledged that there is a challenge. And therefore, the next step now is to ensure that we put the correct people here with expertise and technical understanding of the issues of energy. Because for us as women, energy means our safety. It means liberation, because we are no longer hewers of wood. And therefore we benefit, and hospitals, there is electricity.
Was Jabu Mabuza the wrong person for the job?
I think we took a haphazard decision. So we have time to think now and have a correct person, a professional.
So that was the ANC's Blade Nzimande there, calling it haphazard. You know, yesterday I was talking to you about this earlier on, Tessa. We heard from SAFTU's Xolani Vavi saying that the ANC as a whole should be held accountable and be responsible for the issues because they didn't listen to Eskom executives back in 1997 who was telling them to fix the stuff now because in 10 years' time we're going to have some load shedding. Fair point or not?
I think it's a very fair point. I mean, as I say, none of this happened yesterday. We didn't realize that there was a problem with the lights, just a few months ago, and this is like an 8, 10, 15, 20-year plan. I mean, there are reports that date back from 94, 95, exactly that same time period, which indicate the extent of the damage, the extent of the repair and the renovations that were necessary, and the costs that of not implementing those renovations at the time. And we're paying for that dearly. What's really at play here as well is that state-owned enterprises, to a great extent over the last 10 years, also became a slush fund, possibly, for some of the less competent cadres to be deployed, but also a place where I think many of the ANC's less noble intentions could be played out. So that's South African Airways, Transnet, and so on and so forth, your PRASAs and so on and so forth. So in the chaos, there's a method to the chaos, a method to the madness. And I think every time that somebody who has been quite competent, or who perhaps has been willing to cut out the corruption and to get to the chase, they've inevitably been marginalized. They've inevitably been shunted whilst they were trying to do their job as effectively as possible. Tidi Sumatona comes to mind.
Right.
And I think that is really what's at play here, more than the efficacy of Minister Gordhan or anybody else in this scenario.
Xolani, what do you make of the language being used when ANC members are talking about the situation in Eskom?
The most worrying factor is the fact that the national crisis is being turned into political factional battles of the ANC. And they are hijacking serious issues that we as South African citizens, we need to discuss and we need to find solutions. And another thing, if we are going to say a particular minister is not doing well, we need to go back to the office of Jackson Mthembu, who's currently the minister who's dealing with the monitoring and evaluation, and tell us that these are kind of management measurements that we are using in order to assess any minister that is doing well or a minister that is not. And so if we are going to say a particular minister is not doing well, let's look at our country. There is huge unemployment rate in our country. Are we going to say Tulas is supposed to vacate the office? And also the issue of energy is not only in the enterprise department, it also on the minerals and energy with Gwede Dasha as well, meaning that they have to co-share the responsibility. And moving further, we have the Department of Economic Development, of Treasury and of Trade and Industry as well.
Right.
And those departments are not doing well. What are we saying with these ministers? And so if South Africans are going to accept such kind of direction that the ANC is starting to take now, we have to say, at the end of the day, it seems as if the ANC collectively is not doing what it has claimed that it will do on our behalf. It means that ANC has misled the South Africans, and so the ANC must do the honorable thing that Jabu Mabuza recently or yesterday opted to do.
Xolani, that's where we'll have to leave it. The gang's all here trying to break down the January 8th statement. It is indeed a lot to talk about. The conversations will continue, but we do say thank you very much indeed to our guests, Tessa Dooms, as well as Xolani Dube, the political analyst, as well as Lebohang Pheko, Senior Research Fellow at Trade Collective. Appreciate your time. The news continues. I want to hand it over to Flo. Have yourself a great day, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.